Hello and welcome. My name is Benjamin Carano, and this is part 3 of my series on building a motorized bicycle from start to finish. In today's video, I will be installing the engine kit. All the parts that I used for the whole bike, including the engine, are listed in the description of the first video. That's part 1 of building a motorized bicycle. As always, please support this channel, subscribe, comment if you have any questions, and with that, let's build. I'll just be doing a quick overview again of the parts required to install the engine kit on the bike. Here is the Flying Horse 66cc 2-stroke engine. We have the carburetor and the filter cap for the carburetor. The spark plug power supply, throttle grips, the clutch lever. We have 2 pieces of rubber. One is 1/16 of an inch, one is 1/8 of an inch thick, and we'll be making rubber motor mounts out of these to mount the motor. We have 2 springs that will basically put a little bit of tension on the clutch cable and keep it in place when we install the clutch. We have the throttle cable and the clutch cable. We have a fuel shutoff valve, but this was the fuel shutoff valve that came with the engine kit, but I have to upgrade it to a different fuel shutoff valve. You can see this one has a nut on the front that is meant to go over a threaded gas tank end. This already has a threaded piece in it that is meant to screw into the gas tank, and this frame fits the one that screws in. So I'll leave links to these other miscellaneous parts that I need to buy. And this is also brass instead of aluminum. The reason I did brass is because when you thread it in, I have actually done this before, I've snapped off these threads inside of the gas tank, and I really don't want to do that on my frame, because if I break the gas tank, I basically break the entire frame. So I'll be leaving a link to this upgraded gas valve as well. Here we have fuel line and a fuel filter, the NGK spark plug, and here's the high compression head that we'll be replacing with the original head that is on the motor, and the chrome exhaust pipe. Now let's get mounting the engine. First, I'm going to replace the standard head with the high compression head. Here's the high compression head, and I just have the motor clamped in a vise while I'm going to do this to hold it tight. And I'm going to remove the 4 nuts at the top of the motor with a socket wrench. Now be careful when you remove the original head from the motor. There are going to be regular washers and split washers, which we will be using again to mount the high compression head on, so don't lose any of those. Now here we have the high compression head, and the holes are really deep to kind of get in there, so I'm just going to take the washers and plop them down in. I'm going to take the regular washers first, and then on top of those I will put in the split washers, and then I'll get everything lined up over the threaded rod posts when I bolt it on. So now putting the split washers in on top of the regular washers. Once that's complete, I am going to rest the engine head on the 4 pegs and make sure everything lines up well. I'm not going to let it sit all the way down just yet. I'm just going to get it so that all the holes are lined up. Then I'm going to take my finger and line up all the washers so that they're just over the ends of the 4 threaded rod pegs. After that, I'm going to let it sit all the way down and make sure it has a good fit. Then I'm going to take the nuts and put them back in, and to do that I'm just going to put the nut in the end of the socket and reach the socket with the nut down in and just get them all started for now. I'm not going to tighten them down yet until they're all started. Now that they're all started, I can begin tightening them by hand at first. And then just getting them slightly snug with the wrench, really not too tight yet though. Now that everything is tight and snug with the wrench, I'm going to tighten them now in a crisscross pattern. And this is where we go really tight, making sure it applies even pressure to the engine. And I'm keeping my hand close in to the middle of the wrench instead of way out on the handle, so that I don't accidentally go too tight and strip the threads. But I do want to get them about as tight as I can get them with my hand close to the middle of the wrench. And now I'm really going to crank down. So that's it. The high compression head is now on the motor. Now I'm going to make the rubber motor mounts. So first I'm going to start with the motor mount that's going on this pre-welded motor mount block right here, and then I will do the one that will just cushion a little bit around this seat post tube. But to do that one, I'm going to be using the 1/8 inch thick rubber. The 1/16 inch thick rubber is going to be for the padding around the seat post on the other mount of the motor. So 1/8 inch thick rubber, and how we're going to cut this out first is I'm going to just use a ruler and take measurements of the dimensions. We've got about 1 1/4 wide by 3 inches long. So I'm going to take that same measurement and then measure it out on the rubber and cut it. So I'm going to make a mark at 3 inches. I'm just etching this in with a drill bit tip. And then I'm going to measure down 1 1/4 and etch another mark into the rubber. So now we have 2 little marks, and we'll just be squaring them off and cutting in there. Now it's cut out, and we will drill 2 little holes in it for the pegs of the motor to go through. Before I drill the holes, I am going to do the same procedure as we did to cut it out. I'm going to measure in from the edge of this to the center hole here in the center of this. So it looks like that is about 5/8. And now I'm going to take the piece of rubber and measure in 5/8. I'm going to center it basically, measure in 5/8, and then make a little dot with the drill bit right where 5/8 is, and I'm going to do that on both sides. Measure in 5/8 in the center and make a little dot. Now I've got two small dots that I will basically drill holes, and I'll be using a drill bit as big around as the diameter of these two cuts here, and that will basically make this rubber plate sit on the top of that. Motor sits on top of the rubber plate and has 1/8 of an inch of rubber for a little bit of vibration and to make sure everything's really tight and rests and fits really well on there. I'm just using a drill press, and I'm going to put a block of wood right under the rubber so that the rubber doesn't push in when I drill, and I'll make the holes. And there we have it, two holes that are the diameter of the motor posts, and that'll sit for the motor block. Now the first motor block is finished, and that'll go right there. And so now I'll start working on the second motor block, which is basically just going to be kind of a short ring of rubber to wrap around here, so when the motor clamps to it, it doesn't scratch or ding up the frame. You don't have to do the second one. You don't have to do any of them if you don't want to, but it'll just protect the frame a little more and give the motor a little bit more space to vibrate. To take the measurements to determine where to cut the second rubber mount, I'm going to measure the width of one of these little motor blocks where it mounts to the frame, and that's 1 inch. And then the next measurement is going to be the circumference of this hole, which I am going to estimate about 3 inches. So now I'm going to take those measurements and do the same thing we did with the other motor mount. I'm going to measure 3 inches in from the side, make a little mark with the drill bit, and then 1 inch in, make a little mark, square it up, and cut it the same way I did the other one. So that's it for the second motor mount. That'll basically just outline the inside of this tube up here before it clamps to the frame, so the frame will go inside this rubber so that it doesn't get scratched up or come loose in here. With the two motor mounts done, we can now begin mounting the engine. Then I'm going to take the first rubber motor mount and slide it over the holes of the engine block closest to the exhaust pipe hole. Once that's done, I'm going to rest the engine in, making sure that the rubber motor mount is right over this aluminum motor mount welded onto the frame, exhaust pipe facing forward, carburetor hole facing toward the back. Now for the second rubber motor mount, it turns out that when I wrap it around the seat post tube, the diameter of the seat post tube is now too wide to fit this U shape of the motor bracket. So instead I just cut a smaller piece that will just go on the back side of the seat post tube before we install the motor clamp around that, rather than on the front, because this U shape already fits the frame perfectly. So your frame might be a little bit smaller here, in which case you'd be able to wrap the whole thing around it. I might put a little bit of tape in there if anything comes loose, just wrap a little bit of electrical tape around here. But I don't think I'll have to do that. I'm just going to place this smaller piece of rubber behind, and then place a motor clamp right over that. Put the regular washers on, and then the split washers. and then begin hand tightening it with the nuts on top of the washers. Now we're going to do the same procedure for the front motor mount, only this time we're not going to be using the clamp. I'm just going to be putting the washers and the nuts on the ends of each one of these pegs because we already have our aluminum bar welded onto the frame here that's holding the motor. So regular washer, split washer, and nut. And again, just getting everything hand tight. We'll come back with a wrench and do everything later. Same for the other side, regular washer, and then split washer and nut. And just get hand tight. Now we can take a wrench and begin tightening the nuts. And just get them really snug for now. We'll come back and really crank them down once both sides are really snug. So that feels pretty snug. Get that one a little more. Okay, now let's do the other side. Again, with the other side here, take a wrench and crank down until they feel snug. Alright, now they're both pretty tight, and we can go ahead and crank the whole thing down. So now everything is tight, and hopefully that's not going anywhere. So that's it for part 3, guys. The motor is mounted. Stay tuned for part 4 because I will be attaching some of the extra accessories onto the motor, such as the throttle, the clutch, the spark plug, and whatnot. So be sure to check that out, and comment below if you have any comments or questions. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.